Across the globe, from, well, icy northern waters to sunny tropical shores, this image of a creature, part human, part fish, it's really held a powerful grip on our imaginations, hasn't it?
It absolutely has. It's one of those enduring myths.
So today we're exploring that long history and the fascinating folklore surrounding mermaids. We'll look at where these stories might have started, what these beings were thought to be like, and even touch on some reported encounters.
And you find it's surprisingly widespread. Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, the idea pops up everywhere.
Let's try and understand just what it is about this mythical creature that's captured people's attention for so long.
Sounds good. Maybe starting with the name itself, mermaid.
Right.
It entered Middle English pretty straightforwardly, mere for sea, maid for, well, maid.
Simple enough.
But there was an older term, merman, which you don't hear anymore. They came from Old English and Old High German.
And what did mermean mean?
Essentially, sea woman, or sometimes even female slave.
Huh. Female slave. That's quite a different connotation than we have today. Does that maybe suggest something about early views of the sea?
It's possible. Maybe a sense of belonging to the sea, but perhaps not in a position of power. This merman also connects to other old terms.
Like what?
Well, there's the Old English mermaid, less common, sometimes maybe more of a sea hag figure. Then you see merip in Middle High German, sea woman again.
And in Old Norse.
Jokona, same meaning, sea woman. It really points to a shared, very old concept across those Germanic cultures.
And it seems the iconic fishtail wasn't always the standard feature, especially if you think about the ancient Greek sirens.
That's absolutely right. The sirens, initially they were depicted as human-headed birds. That was their main form.
So how do we get from birds luring sailors to the fish-tailed beings we picture now?
It seems to have been a gradual shift. Some think Germanic myths like Lorelei or Undine, who were often shown with fishtails, might have influenced the perception of sirens over time. But the fish-tailed siren did appear sporadically in Greek art, even in the classical period.
Ah, so it wasn't entirely a later invention.
No, but it really solidified later. The first clear written description we have of sirens with fishtails is in the Liber Monstrorum from around the 7th or 8th century.
And what did it say?
They called them sea girls, described their beauty, their alluring song, but specifically mentioned a scaly fishtail instead of legs.
Okay, so the image is becoming clearer textually.
Definitely. And then by the 11th century, an old German version of the Physiologus that was a popular medieval text about animals explicitly states, Sirenen sind Mermaids.
Which means?
Sirens are mermaids. The identification was complete by then.
Interesting. But you mentioned art sometimes led the text.
Yes. Even earlier, like in a 9th century French Physiologus, the illustration shows a siren as a clear woman fish, a mermaid basically, even though the accompanying text still described her as bird-like.
Wow. So the visual image was just that powerful, it seems.
It appears so. It started to override the older descriptions.
And we often see mermaids or these sirens holding a mirror and a comb. What's that about?
Ah, the mirror and comb. Those became standard accessories. In the context of medieval Christian bestiaries, those items were symbols of vanity, luxuria, or lust, too.
So projecting human moral concerns onto these mythical sea creatures.
Pretty much. It's a common way societies interpret myths through their own values.
Now, besides the sirens, were there other fishy figures in Greek myth?
Oh, certainly. You have Scylla and Charybdis, the monsters Odysseus sailed past. Scylla, known more for violence than seduction, was sometimes depicted in Etruscan art, even before the 6th century BC, as having two tails, mermaid-like, which might connect to later images of two-tailed mermaids, and maybe even the figure of Melusine we might touch on later. Triton, the sea god, also often had two fishtails.
So a whole mix of underwater beings feeding into this archetype, but it wasn't just a Western thing, was it?
Not at all. If you look at ancient Middle Eastern mythology, particularly Mesopotamia, back in the old Babylonian period, you find depictions of human fish beings.
Really? What were they like?
Mostly mermen, actually, called kululu. They were often used as protective figures, believe it or not, on doorways, that sort of thing.
Protective, that's different from the dangerous siren image.
It is. There were occasional mermaids, too, but the mermen seem more common as these guardians.
And then there's the Syrian goddess, a Targetus.
Yes, a tar goddess, or Dusateto, worshipped at Ashkelon. The story goes she fell in love with a mortal, had a child, Semiramis, but then abandoned the baby out of shame and threw herself into a lake.
And transformed.
Into a fish from the waist down. So a human-headed fish goddess. Lucian, the writer, mentioned seeing statues of her that were part fish and others that were fully human. a deity embodying that duality.
It really makes you wonder about the ultimate source of these ideas. Did anyone try to explain them rationally early on?
There were attempts. Anaximander, the pre-Socratic philosopher, even proposed humans originated from aquatic animals way back. Much later, naturalists started suggesting sightings might just be, well, misidentified animals.
Like manatees or dugongs?
Exactly. Or seals. Things that might look vaguely human-like from a distance, especially in the water. There's even a theory about skilled female divers, maybe pearl divers, inspiring some stories. Early efforts to ground the myth in something observable.
Okay, let's move into the folklore from specific places. How about Germanic literature?
Right. In the epic Nibelungenlied, the hero Hagen meets two prophetic merwomen, Merwip named Sieglind and Hedberg, in the Danube River. They warn him about the journey ahead.
Prophetic mermaids.
Yes, and they're linked to Swan Maiden tales, too. Some scholars think they might even be an inspiration for Wagner's Rhine Maidens later on.
So woven into these major epic stories.
And there's another figure, Watschild, a mermaid, Mermaid, in a different poem, Rabenschlacht. She's actually an ancestress of one of the heroes, Wittich.
An ancestor.
Yes, she rescues him and takes him to her home underwater. This character shows up in Old Swedish and Old Norse versions, too, sometimes linked to Danish royalty. So merfolk integrated right into genealogies and national stories.
Fascinating. What about Britain and Ireland, with their strong sea traditions?
Well, one of the earliest potential artistic depictions is a carving in Durham Castle around 1078. In folklore there, mermaids are often seen as unlucky, bad omen.
And disaster.
Exactly. Like in famous ballads, Sir Patrick Spens or The Mermaid. They're often warnings of storms or shipwrecks. They're even said to swim up rivers sometimes.
Not always bad, though.
Not always. Occasionally, they might teach humans cures or grant wishes, but often with a catch. Interestingly, mermen in British lore were often depicted as much wilder, uglier, and more aggressive than the mermaids.
A definite gender split in perception there. And isn't there that lovely story from Zenor in Cornwall?
Ah, yes, the Zenor mermaid. Based on a carving in the church from the 15th century, the story goes she used to listen to a handsome chorister, Matthew Trewhella, sing.
And fell in love.
Supposedly, yes. She lured him away, and he was never seen again, believed to have gone to live with her beneath the waves. It raises questions they debated back then, like, do mermaids have immortal souls?
Heavy stuff. And other types.
You have the Scottish freshwater mermaid, the Seask, and on the Isle of Man, the Benvery was often seen as more benevolent, sometimes helping fishermen.
And Ireland has the marrow, right?
Right, the Marrow. There's a famous tale of Lee Bon, originally a human woman transformed into a mermaid after a flood. She lived for centuries before being caught and eventually baptized, seen as regaining her soul. So a mix of beauty, danger, and spiritual questions.
Let's head north then to Scandinavia.
Okay, so there, the terms are typically half-fru for the mermaid and half-man for the merman. Bishop Pontoppidan in Norway, writing in the 18th century, actually described them quite seriously.
He believed they were real.
He seemed to. He even tried to classify them, suggesting sea ape might be a better term for the merman based on some descriptions. You find similar terms across the region: Icelandic hafru, Swedish hopsfru, or sjöungfru.
Sea ape, that's memorable. Were they generally seen as benevolent?
More ambiguous, often dangerous. Beautiful, yes, but potentially malicious. Known for things like abducting unwary humans, especially young women, or taking revenge if harmed.
And connected to the weather.
Very much so. Their appearance often heralded storms or bad weather. They were also believed to have prophetic powers, like in the widespread story called the Mermaid's Message, where a mermaid gives cryptic warnings.
So powerful, unpredictable beings tied to the sea's moods.
Exactly. There are also stories in Sweden of merfolk kidnapping humans to live with them. And they had names for the offspring of mermaids and mermen marmular. Fishermen believed you could learn about the future from them.
But not all were beautiful. You mentioned another name, Margik.
Ah, yes, the Margiker. That term often referred to something much more monstrous, think sea troll or sea ogress.
How are they described?
The saga of St. Olaf gives a pretty terrifying picture. Huge, with a horse's head, coarse hair, a neck like a serpent's body that arched over the waves, and a terrible shriek that could drive men mad. Definitely not your romantic mermaid.
No, quite the opposite. Okay, let's shift to Western Europe. We mentioned Melusine earlier.
Right. Melusine is a key figure in French folklore. She was cursed to transform sometimes into a serpent from the waist down, sometimes later depicted with a fish tail, often two tails. She married a nobleman but forbade him from seeing her on Saturdays, when her transformation occurred,
And he broke the promise, I assume.
of course, leading to tragedy. She's often linked to that two-tailed mermaid seen in heraldry. Then you had the influence of thinkers like Paracelsus, who wrote about elementals, including water spirits or undines,
And his idea was,
that these spirits lacked immortal souls, but could gain one by marrying a human. This idea directly inspired Friedrich de la Motte Fouquet's story Undine, and later, Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid.
the origin of that soul-seeking theme. And mermaids were sometimes associated with lust in this period, too.
Yes, particularly in Romanesque art and thought, the mermaid could be a symbol of temptation and worldly desires.
What about the Eastern Mediterranean, like Byzantine and later Ottoman Greek traditions?
Interestingly, both the bird-like siren and the fish-tailed mermaid seemed to coexist in folklore there for quite some time. But a more modern Greek legend ties the mermaid figure directly to Alexander the Great.
How so?
It's said his sister, Thessalonike, transformed into a mermaid, a gorgona, after his death. She haunts the Aegean Sea and asks sailors on passing ships, "Is King Alexander alive?"
And what's the right answer?
You have to say, "He lives and reigns and conquers the world." If you give the wrong answer or say he's dead, she flies into a rage and sinks the ship. A very specific, localized legend.
Wow. Okay, moving eastwards into Slavic regions.
There we encounter the Rusalkas. They're often seen as the Slavic version of sirens or naiads, water spirits inhabiting rivers and lakes.
That's their typical story.
They're usually depicted as the restless, vengeful spirits of young women who died tragically, especially by drowning, often before their time or due to betrayal by a lover.
And they lure men.
Yes, they lure young men with their beauty and song, then drag them down to a watery death. Dvořák's opera Rusalka is based on these legends. There's also the old East Slavic epic about Sadko, a musician who ends up living in the underwater court of the Caesar and marries his daughter.
So, a darker, often tragic feel to those stories. Let's cross continents to Asia.
China. China has very ancient texts, like the Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, which describes a merfolk race called the Di people. It also mentions other beings with human heads and fish bodies, and the term Rinyu, meaning human fish.
Were they described in detail?
Some later texts, like the Taiping Guangji, describe the Harinyu. They're said to have human-like faces, arms and legs, could weave fine cloth, and even reproduce like humans. There are stories of lonely widows or widowers keeping them.
Kept them, like pets.
Almost seems that way in some accounts. There's even one slightly bizarre anecdote about an envoy seeing a Rinyu captured off the coast of Korea, and it was noted for being, well, quite adept at relations with humans.
Right. Moving swiftly on, what about Korea itself?
Korea has its own share of mermaid tales, often associated with coastal villages. There's a story about a governor named Kim Dam-ryung who saved some captured mermaids from fishermen. Another legend speaks of Princess Hwangok, who came from a mythical undersea kingdom.
Any benevolent figures?
Yes, there's the mermaid Sinjike, who is said to warn fishermen about approaching storms, helping them get to safety. So again, that omen or predictor role appears.
And Japan?
In Japan, the term is ninyo, literally human fish. Depictions vary, but often it's a creature with a human female head or torso on a fish body, sometimes more grotesque than beautiful.
And they have a connection to longevity.
Yes, strong belief was that eating the flesh of a ninyo could grant extraordinarily long life, maybe even immortality. Most famous story is about Yao Bikuni, the 800-year nun, who supposedly ate ninyo flesh accidentally as a child. Ningyo are also considered a type of yukai, or supernatural creature.
Okay, let's sweep across Southeast Asia and into the Pacific.
A huge variety here. In versions of the Ramayana, popular in Thailand and Cambodia, you find Suvarnamacha, a mermaid princess with a golden body.
Golden, wow.
Yes. In Indonesia, particularly Java, there's the powerful sea goddess Nyai Roro Kidul, who sometimes appears in a mermaid form known as Nyai Bloram.
And the Philippines?
Lots of different figures there. The Serena is the general term, but you have regional variations like the Bicolano Majandara, who are quite vicious, or the Sambal Mambubuno with two fins, known for drowning fishermen. There's also a Cebuano tale about a girl named Maria cursed into a milkfish-bodied form.
Even down to Polynesia?
Yes, the Maori people of New Zealand have the myth of Panya of the Reef, involving sea people, including mermen and mermaids. It really is a global phenomenon.
It truly is. How about Africa?
In West, Central, and Southern Africa, you have the veneration of Mamiwata spirits. These are powerful water deities, often female, frequently depicted as beautiful, seductive, sometimes dangerous, and occasionally shown with fishtails, embodying mermaid-like qualities.
So integrated into spiritual traditions.
Very much so. You also find figures like the Njuzu in Zimbabwe, water spirits sometimes described with fishtails, and the Jingu in Cameroon.
And the Arabian world. Did mermaids feature there?
Interestingly, 1001 Nights includes tales about sea people, but they're often described as anatomically just like land humans, only they have the ability to breathe and live underwater.
So not the half-fish form.
Not usually in those specific tales.
Yeah.
They can intermarry with land humans, and stories like Abdullah the Fisherman and Abdullah the Merman describe complex underwater societies. It's a different take humans adapted for the sea.
Fascinating variation. And finally, the Americas.
Well, post-contact, you find mermaid figures identified by Neo-Taino nations, like Gaikaya. In the Caribbean and parts of North and South America, traditions heavily influenced by West African beliefs feature mermaid-like water spirits.
Like Mami Wata-related figures.
Exactly. Watrama in Suriname, Mamajo in St. Lucia, figures associated with Umanya or Urzuli in Vodou and Santeria traditions. In Brazil, there's the famous Iara or Mandagua, Mother of the Water.
What's her story?
She's a beautiful woman, often with green eyes and long hair, sometimes part fish, who sits by rivers combing her hair and singing enchantingly to lure men to their doom. Her origins seem to blend indigenous myths, like the originally male water spirit Ipupiara, with European siren lore and African influences.
A true blend of cultures.
Absolutely. And off the coast of Brazil, on Fernando de Noronha Island, there's the legend of the Alamoa, a seductive, often naked blonde woman who lures men, especially sailors, to their deaths. Some think there might be Dutch folklore connections there too.
It's just incredible how these stories traveled and transformed. Now, with all this folklore, it inevitably leads to the question, have people actually claimed to see mermaids?
Oh, absolutely. Reports go way back. Pliny the Elder, the Roman writer, mentioned sightings of what he called tritons and nereids in Gaul and off the coast of modern-day Portugal, though he himself suspected they might just be unusual sea creatures. Likely seals, perhaps.
And during the Age of Exploration.
Lots of reports then. Christopher Columbus famously recorded seeing 3 sirenas near Hispaniola in 1493, but he noted they weren't as beautiful as they were painted and had rather masculine faces. Certainly manatees.
Right. That makes sense.
Henry Hudson's crew reported seeing a mermaid with a woman's upper body, white skin, and long black hair in the Arctic Ocean near Novaya Zemlya in 1608. Again, what they actually saw is debatable, maybe a seal or beluga whale.
These encounters continued.
Yes. In the 17th century, there was a famous specimen from Brazil examined by the Danish physician Thomas Bartholin. He called it a siren and had illustrations made. It was described as having a human-like upper body, almost certainly a manatee again.
And sightings linked to omens.
There were reports from Dutch Formosa, Taiwan, around 1661, during the siege by Koxinga. Merfolk sightings were interpreted as a bad omen for the Dutch defenders.
What about the Philippines? Were dugongs mistaken there too?
Very likely. 17th century accounts describe creatures called peshmusher, womanfish, probably dugongs. They were even hunted, allegedly for medicinal purposes, believing parts could cure certain ailments.
And the Amboina mermaid.
Ah, yes. That was an 18th century case. A creature supposedly captured near Ambon Island in the Moluccas, Indonesia. Detailed descriptions and illustrations were published by Samuel Fowlers and Louis Renard. Again, most likely a misrepresented dugong or perhaps another marine animal, maybe even cleverly constructed.
Even into the 21st century.
Believe it or not, yes. In 2009, the town of Kiryat Yam in Israel offered a $1 million reward for proof of a mermaid supposedly seen off its coast. And in Zimbabwe in 2012, work on reservoirs was reportedly halted because workers claimed mermaids were harassing them and interfering with equipment.
Oh, definitely. The belief, or at least the stories, persist. But alongside potential misidentification, there have been outright hoaxes, right?
Oh, definitely. The most famous is probably P.T. Barnum's Fiji mermaid, exhibited in the 1840s.
What was that actually?
It was a fabrication, likely made by a Japanese fisherman, combining the upper body of a monkey with the lower body of a fish, sewn together and dried. Barnum created a huge sensation with it.
So deliberate fakes were a known thing.
Yes, these kinds of composite mermaids, often made from monkey and fish parts, were actually crafted in Japan and elsewhere in Asia and sometimes traded by Dutch merchants to Europe as curiosities. There was also the sea devil specimen found in Iran. And in Europe, you had the phenomenon of Jenny Hanivers.
Jenny Hanivers.
Those were dried rays or skates, often manipulated while still pliable to look like grotesque little demons or dragons, sometimes passed off as unusual sea creatures, maybe even mermaid-like figures.
So a mix of mistaken identity and pure showmanship. And people have performed as mermaids too.
Yes, mermaid shows became a form of entertainment. There were performers at the 1939 New York World's Fair, for instance, and perhaps most famously, the underwater shows at Weeki Springs in Florida, which started in 1947 and still continue today, with performers wearing fabric tails.
And the ama divers in Japan.
Right, the ama are traditional Japanese female skin divers, known for diving for pearls and shellfish. Their skill and connection to the sea sometimes led to them being romanticized or linked to mermaid imagery, though they are, of course, entirely human.
It's quite a journey from ancient myth to modern performance. Now, looking at it from a purely scientific standpoint, what's the verdict?
Well, from a biological perspective, the existence of a creature that's half mammal and half fish in the way mermaids are typically depicted is highly improbable, to say the least.
Why is that?
Numerous reasons. Thermoregulation would be a massive challenge. Mammals are warm-blooded, fish are cold-blooded. How would that work? There were huge evolutionary mismatches in physiology, breathing, reproduction, digestion. The systems are just fundamentally different.
And the lack of evidence.
Crucially, yes. Despite millennia of seafaring and exploration and now deep-sea technology, there's never been any credible physical evidence found. No bodies, no fossils, no unambiguous recordings. Scientifically, it remains firmly in the realm of myth and folklore.
But beyond the literal, the figure has held symbolic meaning, hasn't it?
Absolutely. As we mentioned in ballads and folklore, they often serve as omens, representing the dangers and mysteries of the sea. And some thinkers have explored deeper meanings.
Like Dorothy Dinnerstang?
Yes, in her book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, she suggested that these hybrid creatures, part human, part animal, reflect a fundamental aspect of the human condition. Our awareness that we are both part of the animal kingdom, connected to nature, yet also somehow distinct from it with our consciousness and culture.
That's a powerful idea. The mermaid as a symbol of that very human duality.
Exactly. It embodies that tension, that connection and separation.
It's certainly clear that belief in or fascination with mermaids has an incredibly long, rich, and varied history, touching nearly every corner of the globe.
It really has. And the figure itself has constantly shifted and adapted, reflecting whatever culture was telling the story, their fears, hopes, their understanding of the natural world, and perhaps themselves.
So what do you think it is that continues to make the idea of mermaids so compelling for us today, even knowing the science? Is it just the allure of the unknown depths?
Or maybe it's something else entirely. Perhaps it's that reflection of our own complex nature caught between different worlds that still resonates. It's definitely something to ponder.